Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I am Mark Stay. And as always, our colossal thanks to everyone who supports this podcast, not least the good people on Patreon and the good people on the Bestseller Academy.
Have we got a treat for you today? I'm so excited about this, Mark. This is a brilliant, brilliant interview. Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to begin. So you better start, Mark. Tell us, remind us about the brilliant Steve Cavanagh.
Steve Cavanagh. We've seen this before. So Steve Cavanagh is the best-selling author of the Eddie Flynn novels and a bunch of standalone thrillers as well. In 2018, The Liar won the Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger for Crime Novel of the Year. He's won the Theakston's Old Peculiar. All of his novels have actually been nominated for awards or have won awards. He's a former lawyer. He was born and raised in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Now, we spoke to Steve in episode 125, an episode that we called Author on the Verge of a Massive Breakthrough, because this was on the eve of the publication of his book 13, which, as you will hear, did quite well. His new book is The Devil's Advocate, and it's an Eddie Flynn novel, and the shout line for this is, he's won every trial because he's behind every murder. And we discuss writing really great hooky shout lines, which Steve just has this supernatural talent for. We talk about writing different points of view. We talk about the amazing changes in his life and career since we last spoke. And he's just a lovely bloke.
Oh, it's just such a brilliant interview, folks. We really do spoil you on this show. Please be upstanding for this incredible interview with Mark and the lovely, lovely Steve Cavanagh.
Steve Cavanagh, welcome back to the Bestseller Experiment, sir. How are you today?
I'm very well indeed. I'm delighted to be back. This is one of my favourite podcasts, so thank you very much, Mark, for having me.
Oh, bless you, sir. Thank you so much. And we're here to talk about your new book, The Devil's Advocate. Eddie Flynn is back. The Eddie Flynn, the former con artist turned lawyer. And your shout line, Steve, honestly, the shout line for this one, he's won every trial because he's behind every murder. And that's not Eddie, is it? Tell us more about this one. This is a death penalty case, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. This refers to the character who is really the devil's advocate. He's a district attorney called Randall Corn, who operates in a small fictional town in Alabama. And he is obsessed with the death penalty. And he's based on a kind of an amalgamation of real characters, of real people. Because there are some district attorneys in America who live and breathe to execute people, believe it or not. As terrifying and as unbelievable as that may sound, it's absolutely true. So in this one, Eddie is he's out of his comfort zone. He's not in New York. He's gone down south to represent a young man who is on trial literally for his life. And he arrives and it's an entire hostile town against him. Everyone thinks his client is guilty. And meanwhile, Eddie and his new team are trying to get a grips in the case and defend this man. There are other characters. There's a character called the pastor who is working away behind the scenes with something else much more dangerous and much more evil going on behind the scenes. So it's a lot of good fun, this one.
Randall Corn sounds like the villain in a Stephen King novel.
The Randall flag. You know, I'm a Stephen King fan like you, so you know I steal from the best.
Absolutely, why the hell not? Oh, superb stuff. Now you've become the master of the twisty turning novel, the master of the classic shout line. I mean, the shout lines on your books. Let's have a look. When we last spoke to you, it was just before the publication of 13, and the shout line for that was, the serial killer isn't on trial, he's on the jury. The liar is, it takes one to catch one. Twisted, never let a murder get in the way of a good story. This is 50-50, a previous book. Two sisters on trial for murder. They accuse each other. Which will you believe? These are so hooky. How can anyone resist? Do these arrive fully formed, Steve, or do you really have to work on these? And if you do, tell us how you do it.
Of course. Well, most of the books start with that shout line. The Devil's Advocate didn't. We had to rack our brains to come up with that one, and it took a lot of work for that. But most of them, that's the premise for the book. I'm asking a question, and that's for me when I'm writing the book. But that's how I want to sell the book, because before I wrote 13, I was, my life changed after that book. And so it's good that I get to come back to talk about all this, because you had me on right before that book. Like, it was literally publication week. I'll never forget it. And I'm still very grateful that you did, Mark. You had to have me on for that. It really helped. But what I decided was, or what I realized was, it wasn't enough, I think, in this day and age, just to write what I thought was a good book. It had to be a book that other people would want to read.
That's crazy. What are you talking about?
Yes. It's that. I remember something John Grisham said, I only write a book if I know it's a good story and a lot of other people are going to want to read this book. And I had sort of forgotten about the other bit. So I wanted now, going forward, all my books to have a tagline on them. And something, if the reader sees that, they make a noise. They go, ooh.
Yeah.
And they want to know more about it. Because I think, there's so many great books out there these days. I think I want to try and have something to engage the reader straight away before they've even opened the book. I want them to see something on the cover that intrigues them and hooks them in. And in terms of how I come up with that, I don't know. Usually it's a question, it's like, what if? Or sometimes it's bringing two separate things together in an unusual way. Like a serial killer and a jury.
I mean, to me, it seems like, and I might get a bit highfalutin here, but, I'm kind of a bit obsessed with theme and central dramatic argument in stories at the moment. Is my big thing at the moment. And a lot of these do pose a dilemma. They do pose a big question that the story tackles. And I think perhaps that is the key, to figuring out what the theme is, what your book is actually about, what will challenge your characters throughout the story, and coming up with a good hook. So are you aware of that as you're doing it?
Not aware of theme at all when I'm writing. Not at all. There's a brilliant, this is a great writing podcast. There's a brilliant interview with a writer called Tony Gilroy.
Tony Gilroy, fantastic. Right.
He's an amazing screenwriter, and it is a brilliant conversation. He's on Brian Koppelman's podcast called The Moment. Brian's also a brilliant screenwriter.
It's brilliant, yeah.
And they're talking about this, and Tony, he says to Tony, how aware are you of theme? And Tony says, I'm not aware of it at all. I'm not shopping for the dream, I'm shopping for the mattress, which I think is a brilliant line, and one I'm stealing from him. But so that I'm not aware of theme at all. When I finish the first draft, I'll go back and I'll see things, which are a theme. And normally there are issues I've dealt with in the book that I wanted to deal with, but I wasn't aware of the overall theme of them. And sometimes they tie together. And it was the same for The Devil's Advocate. There's quite a few themes in here about. One of the themes that came up was the confession poem published after the end of the Second World War by a priest about when is it right to stand up for someone and speak for someone. And it's on lots of Holocaust memorials. And it's, when they came for the social unionists or social democrats, I said nothing because I'm not a social democrat. When they came for the Jews, I said nothing because I'm not Jewish. When they came for the Catholics, etc., etc., etc. And it finishes with, and when they came for me, there was no one left to speak for me. And that's a theme that goes right throughout the book, but I wasn't conscious or aware of it when I was writing it, really. I was only in the second draft that I specifically referred to that question. When do you stand up? Because the book's told through different points of view, and some characters, obviously like Eddie, they will stand up for someone. And other people, they are more cautious of it. They have a lot to lose. And they're afraid. And we're all afraid of that. And through Eddie fighting for people who he believes in has cost him dearly. So this question it's a difficult one. It's one that's more and more relevant these days, I think. So that was obviously something in my mind, which just went in and peppered the book. But I wasn't entirely aware of it until I'd read the first draft and gone through and then added that went in subsequent drafts to reinforce that theme.
Wonderful. Excellent stuff. Do you find now that you're several books into the Eddie Flynn books, are you getting a much better idea of what it is that readers enjoy about Eddie? And is that something that you fold into your writing?
Yeah, I think so. I think they like the interaction between Eddie and some of the other characters, like Harry Ford. People really like that relationship. And I've introduced new characters into the series now. So Kate Brooks is a lawyer from New Jersey, and she came in 50/50. And there is a character called Block, who first appeared in my standalone novel, Twisted. And she was in 50/50, and now she's in The Devil's Advocate. So I'm building up a cast list slowly but surely. But from early reviews, people are really enjoying the interaction between these characters now. And they're starting to form an emotional attachment to them, which is brilliant. That's all I could ever have hoped for, really.
I love that you brought in the character, because Twisted was a standalone, but you brought the character. So you've got the Steve Cavanagh universe. You've got a whole universe out there now. How do you keep track of that?
I don't really. So I will make mistakes, and then someone else will read it and say, well, you can't do that because you said something else in another book. And I say, okay, sorry about that. Thank you very much for pointing that out. So I don't really, each book is designed to work as a complete standalone. So someone who's never read an Eddie Flynn book or any of my books before can pick up any one, and they will have just as good an experience as if it was the 6th book or 7th book they'd read. So that's very important to me, because I never want it to be as if there's a joke that people aren't getting. It's something referred to in an earlier book that's coming back, and if you haven't read that earlier one, you're not getting that experience. I wanted everyone to try and have the same experience, really, when they're reading the book for the first time.
Wonderful. You mentioned earlier that you were on the podcast before, and folks, that was episode 125. We'll put a link in the show notes so you can go back and listen to that, because it was such a fun interview. And as you say, I think it was the week of publication of 13, which is the book that just went wallop, just went absolutely everywhere. And huge congratulations on that. We were so delighted to see it do so well. Can we talk about all the things that have changed since then, and the biggest lessons that you've learned since then?
At that time, I think the first 3 Eddie Flynn books combined had sold about 10,000 copies. And now, before the next book comes out, before the Devil's Advocate book comes out, we've sold over 1 million copies now. And 13 itself has sold over 300,000 copies. So that's a big change in my life. And, so when I spoke to you, I was still a full-time lawyer and writing at night at my kitchen table. And
yes,
my life has changed immensely since then. So now I'm no longer a lawyer. I was able to go full-time writing because of the success of 13 in particular. And now I don't have a routine at all. Whereas I had a brilliant writing routine, now it's all over the place, especially with COVID. So there's been big changes. And in terms of my writing, I think I'm a better writer than I was before. I try to learn as much as I can for writing a book and try and do something different. So I think I'm a better writer. I'm a more content and happy person. I'm not as tired as I used to be. And I just have a much better quality of life now than I did then. So it's been a huge change for me.
Wonderful stuff. I mean, folks, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you'll see Steve is in his magnificent office, books everywhere. Quite a change from the kitchen table. Is that giving you that ability to close the door? Stephen King on writing talked about closing the door, having a space where people aren't moving through the house and making tea and coffee and stuff like that. Has that given you bigger space to think, or do you still have the same kind of structural problems that you had before, or character problems that we all face?
Well, I still have probably more problems than ever before in terms of that. But because I think it gets harder. The more I write, each book, I think, for me, is more difficult than the last one. That's the way I feel. I don't ever feel this is getting easier. I think this is getting harder for me every time. But closing the door is great. But then, as we know, there'll be a dog barking or someone will come to the door and, it's your concentration is broken. But it is great to have a space that's just for working. And I love that. And it does focus me when I'm here. Before we moved to this house, and when I had given up work, I was writing in coffee shops. So I would leave the kids to school and I would go for a couple of hours to a coffee shop or a library. And I would sit there and write. And that was really good. That was really intense, focused time. When I'm in my office, I can kind of be in here in the morning and be here in the afternoon. And there's quite a bit of more procrastination goes on in an office, I think, on my own. But apart from that, it's been great. It's brilliant to have your own space to work. And I really enjoy. I enjoy being at my desk. And I want to be at my desk, which is important for me.
I'm interested to talk about this idea that it gets harder, because I can totally relate to that, because every time you start and I'm starting something new this week and I'm at the bottom of the mountain and I'm starting to push that boulder again, and you start thinking, bloody hell, surely this gets easier at some point. But it really doesn't. I think it's that thing of, if you gain a little knowledge about something, you realize how ignorant you are about the whole subject as a whole. Does that ring true? Completely.
And it's especially difficult for me the way I write. The beginning of a book is very difficult because I don't plan anything out at all. I have a rough idea and let's go and see what happens. And I spin my wheels very badly for the first 20,000 words. Right. I will write, 10,000 words, stop, go back and rewrite all of that again at 20,000 words. And I'm trying to get myself a solid base so I know this is a book that could be completed. I have a solid base here. I don't need to worry about this. I've established everything I need to do. And act one, if you like, is kind of okay. That's not a disaster. And that gives me then the opportunity to go and fail and get something else wrong in the second act. So I have the real anxiety, the first 20,000 words, and I really go over that and hone it and edit it quite heavily. Which means I'm not making any progress. I'm still working on the one thing, but that's the way it's been for all of my books, really. And I'm recognized that at the start of my process. But every time I think, oh God, I should just go on, stop going over and re-editing this, just keep going. But every time I find myself doing the same thing.
In some ways, that's both reassuring and terrifying. It never gets any better. I remember when we last spoke as well, you were very you were a great proponent of this idea of being part of a writers community, particularly the crime writers community. And do you find solace, when you hit these walls, do you find solace in the community? Do you find that sharing these problems really, really helps you sort of break through them?
It doesn't really. I have to say, I've never really talked too much about my writing. I always keep it very private because I'm very private about what I'm doing. So I never really, that's not something I ever do. But I do find solace in listening to other writers. For example, John Connolly, I know he's been on your show, and John has always wanted to throw out his first 20,000 words of every new book.
Yeah.
And has to physically resist himself from doing so and keep going. So to know that I'm in the same boat as someone of the caliber of John Connolly, there's solace in that. But I never really talk about my work with other writers when I'm writing it. I just never did that for me.
Okay.
But it's just a private thing. I don't know why. I think maybe it's if I tell someone about it, then it's not special anymore. I like having something good that I can really polish and go, there you go, look at that beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Whereas when it's still, covered in mud and it looks a bit weird, that's not the time to be talking about it to anybody. You wait till it's in good shape before you do that.
I appreciate that. There's also something about if you start pitching something before it's ready, then you start seeing the faults in it. You start doubting yourself, the project, the whole thing crumbles around your ears. So I do kind of understand where you're coming from with that. I would like to talk to you about one particular craft thing, because in your previous novel, 50/50, you have 3 point of view characters. You've got Eddie and Kate and someone just known as She. And She is the murderer. So we're in the head of the murderer, and they never identify themselves, so you're kept guessing. Was that fun, or was that a complete nightmare? I'm just fascinated to know how you work with POV in that case.
It was both. It was both, because that She is one of the sisters in the book, and it's clear it's one of those 2 sisters, but you don't know which one it is.
Yeah.
So what made it fun was leaving little clues here and there in the narrative for the reader, because I wanted the reader, the way that book is entirely structured is the reader reads a chapter and goes, oh my God, it's her. I know it's that sister there. It's definitely her. And then they read another chapter and they go, oh no, I got it all wrong. It's not, it's the other one. And it flips like that. Not exactly chapter for chapter, but pretty much. So I liked leaving little false trails and little clues throughout that narrative. Also, but it was difficult in trying not to give away who it was. That was the real tricky thing. And it took a lot of thought into writing those chapters. So it was technically quite challenging. But I find a bigger challenge. There's a bigger challenge in that book. There's a whole sequence in that book, a whole section of the book, which takes place over the space of 2 minutes. But it's like 50 pages. And it's two series characters. So it's Block and Harry, who both get a knock on their door. And it's told through Harry's perspective and Block's perspective and the She perspective, because it's the She who's knocking on the door who's going to kill one of them. And that whole section took weeks to really get right, because it's a little bit of a play on the... there's a sequence in Silence of the Lambs where there's a point of view switch with the door opening. It's in the book, it's in the movie, it's brilliantly well done. And I thought, can I take that, do it completely differently, but expand it hugely? And that's what I tried to do with that. So again, that gave me the idea for it, but I'm doing it completely differently, and it's a much longer section. So that was the big technical thing with point of view in that book, in that sequence. And I've had a lot of good reactions from readers who have read that, who have been either shouting at me, or have dropped the book, or have been screaming and have frightened pets and children. So that was a lot of fun. It was very rewarding to do that.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now, when we last spoke, you told us how you started out in screenwriting, then got rejected by Francis Ford Coppola for not being Irish enough. Any thoughts of returning to screenwriting? Because you've had, am I right in thinking you've had books options, stuff is in development? What's happening there?
No, nothing is in development at all.
Really?
So screenwriting is something. Yeah, screenwriting is something I would never say I'll never do that again. I enjoy it. The technical aspects of it, I think, are a bit difficult for me now, because it's so structured, and it's so, you have to have, and the formatting is something which I think I would need to get the hang of again. But I love screenwriting. Reading a brilliant screenplay is a marvelous and unique reading experience, because you're getting the movie. It's not a book, and you're not watching a movie, but you're seeing a movie in your head, and that's a beautiful experience. So yeah, I'll never rule it out. Going back there, I might. You never know. If some fool wants to pay me to write something for TV, I'd be more than happy to take their money.
So are you telling me nothing's been optioned of your stuff?
I can't. You know what it is? I can't really say one way or another. But
love that. That's a great answer. That's my favorite answer.
Nothing in development. Put it like that. I know there's probably about 10 different things you could take from that, but unfortunately, that's all I'm allowed to say.
That's fine. That's good enough for me. That's good enough for me, Steve. Wonderful. So, what's next? What's coming next from you? Is there more Eddie Flynn? Will there be more standalones? Are you mixing it up like that, or?
My plan, which may go awry in spectacular ways, is I have a standalone in my back pocket, which I think is quite special. I think it's by far the best thing I've ever written. And I have another Eddie Flynn in the works now. So I don't know what's going to happen with either of them, but I'm quite proud of that standalone. I think it's something. If I was hit by a bus and that book was published, I think that might be the one that people remember me for. Put it like that. So I'm quite proud of it. And there's more Eddie Flynn in the works as well, which I love. And I have big plans for Eddie Flynn in the future. There's going to be a lot more Eddie Flynn books. And I can see a couple of books ahead now with Eddie and expanding that cast of characters even further. I have a character in mind to bring in to the series now, who I think is very special. Maybe just as special as Eddie. So I'm really looking forward to doing that.
Oh, this is all. Don't get hit by a bus. Look both ways before crossing the road, because we want to be. These books are such treats. They're such wonderful, thrill, page-turning wonders, and it's been such a joy seeing since 13, just seeing everything explode around you. It's just fantastic, Steve. It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. So, thank you so much for coming back on, and let's do it again in a couple of 100 episodes.
Yeah, of course. Anytime you want me to get, when I come back on now and I've lost everything, the books will be a total failure. I'll be broadcasting from a hostel somewhere. But that's wood.
That's definitely
Thank you, Steve. Speaks again soon. Bye-bye.
Real pleasure.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. They say that you got to work hard at your craft to be a successful author, but it also helps being a really lovely person, doesn't it? Hey? It must help you in life a bit. I just love that interview, Mark. Absolutely inspiring, brilliant, wonderful, and just some of the nuggets that Steve had to hear his story, to have, and that's what I love about the podcast, to document the before and after of what happened. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. And the good news is, since we recorded that, because we recorded that pre-publication, his book, The Devil's Advocate, has been in the UK top 10 for 2 weeks at the time of recording.
Wow. That's the Sunday Times bestseller list, isn't it? Which is like the one. For anyone in the US, Canada, you're all very familiar with the New York Times bestseller list. Well, if you want to add to your list of milestones, and get a bestseller in the UK, I think the Sunday Times bestseller list, is that the kind of like most revered, would you say? Or
well, they take Nielsen sales figures, so it's based on actual sales through the till. It's
the badge everyone wants, as well as Amazon, New York Times, etc. So, but yeah, let's dive in. There's so much to cover here. I mean, absolutely blown away by the shout lines, or as Steve called them, the taglines. I mean, it's quite magical that in less than 10 words, you can hook someone in so incredibly well. And yet we spend all of this time writing the other 80,000 plus words sometimes. And yet it's sometimes the most important words are those first 10 words, which are on the front of the book or on the press release or read out on a podcast, which make people think, oh, I'm going to read that book.
Yeah. And it's interesting, as Steve said, very often for him, That's one of the first things. It didn't come with Devil's Advocate, but for a lot of his other books, that's the first thing that comes along. And not everyone can do that. That is a real special talent. Funnily enough, we had a session on the Academy where we were looking at people's one-liners and blurbs. And as a group, we were sort of peer reviewing them and suggesting, improvements and what worked and what different. It's really hard, really, really hard. And Steve has this great knack for it. But I think this is because Steve said he had this great revelation where he said, you know what, I'm going to write books that people want to read. Which is,
I love that.
I know it sounds kind of flippant, but you remember a few weeks ago, I kept banging on about the writer's commitment to the reader, and he wants to give them a good time and deliver on the promise of the premise. He wants to engage the reader straight away. That's gonna, that is your first step on the path to bestsellerdom, folks. You're not writing to, show off what a great prose stylist you are, or get all highfalutin. If you want to tell a cracking story that's going to have people flipping those pages, and then crucially, when they get to the end, they're going to hand it to a friend and say, you've got to read this. Why should I read this? Oh, well, you should read it because it's about a guy, this lawyer, who's won every trial, but that's because he's behind every murder. You're doing the work for them. You're giving them that shout line that they pass on.
It's absolutely brilliant. And I think, playwrights know this. Playwrights know this because when they're writing their play, they know that they're going to be peering out to the audience and seeing how many of them are on the edge of the seats, or worse, how many of them have fallen asleep. And as authors, we forget, right? Well, we've been there. We both, we've sat in those seats in the plays as well. I mean, everyone's seen a cracking play, and everyone's ever a nap as well in one of them. But I think the interesting thing is that a playwright knows that there will be real people sitting in a room watching what they've created. We kind of know as writers or authors, although we kind of forget this sometimes, that there are actual real people that are going to be reading our book. And it's so important to make that connection and realize that there are human beings that are going to be, demanding that you keep their attention, that you make your endings of each of your chapters page turners, that you have written a great story that keeps them on the hook. And the fact that Steve starts with that incredible premise, or that idea of the what if, as he calls it, is such a brilliant way to. So I would say, actually writing the final book hook, as we call it in the Academy, and we've got a whole course on how to write book hooks in the Academy. But writing that final version that goes on the book is a really hard thing to do. But writing anything, no matter how bad it is or how much it needs to be improved, that gets you writing from that place to start with is huge. And weirdly enough, I've been working on, I've been plotting in quite a lot of depth a novel that I'm working on at the moment. And
this is news.
I know,
here we
it's
go.
new. Well, it's been going on for a while. I haven't talked about it. But you know what I did immediately after that Steve interview? I've got my bullet journal out, and I have a page here called Book Hooks. Because I thought, I haven't actually, I've played with it, but I haven't actually specifically said, right, what is that? Because hearing Steve's, all of his, you're just like, oh, that's so good. That is so good. And it's like, how can I write something even approaching anywhere near, even remotely, edge of the shore, wherever, but just gets that down, because I felt I'm right in that place at the moment where I need to define that hook because it's so important. It is your elevator pitch in many ways, isn't it, to anyone you talk about your book with? But Steve is the past master. And is it any coincidence is that he's now sold 1 million books? I don't think so.
Well, let's just review that little statistic. The first 3 books combined sold 10,000 copies, which, by the way, not bad. That's probably above average for a lot of books, a lot of authors.
A lot of authors would be very happy with that.
3 books into their career. Yeah. That's not. You're probably earning, and that's UK sales. So you're probably earning your advance back. That's all very good. But now he's sold over 1 million, and one book alone, 13, which is the book that came out just after we last spoke to Steve, sold over 300,000 copies. Whoa.
Let's just sit for a minute, Mark, and imagine.
Yeah, let's just
bask. Let's imagine that instead of lying, you see those American Beauty, and she's lying in the on the bed with all the roses, and there's other shots of people who steal money from banks and they're lying in all the money. Imagine lying in what would that look like to be lying in 300,000 copies of your book? I mean, that would be, how big a room would that be? I can't even begin to think. How many books does W.H. Smith have, for example, or Waterstones?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's probably a shop full of books, isn't it? Yeah,
do you know, we should find out. Someone from Waterstones or someone in the US or chapters in Canada, get in contact with us and tell us what the average number of books is in the average size bookstore, so that we can then attribute that visually.
Yeah. It could be 3 Waterstones or something like that.
Or how many books would it take to fill every seat in, or to fill, say, Wembley Stadium? That would be a lot, obviously. But again, or a tennis court, something that we can all visualize just so we can work it out. But yeah, 300,000, that's quite mind-blowing. But I mean, it's only going to go one way for Steve now, really. I mean, he joked about I'll come back on the show when I'm in a hostel and talking about how it didn't work out. But we know, Steve, it's only going one way, because you've got behind you what we call momentum, writer's momentum. We talk about it a lot in the academy. It's like the wind's in your sail. As a sail is up and the wind blows, the wind will always blow.
But what's always encouraging to hear from authors of Steve's stature is that it's not really getting any easier.
Yeah. Well, it's
like I said, it's reassuring and it's terrifying, but it just shows that Steve isn't just blithely knocking these out. He is pouring his blood, sweat, and tears into every story, because he knows he now has expectation. He knows that he wants to deliver a great story. Steve is part of this great crime community, and I see him all the time recommending other people's books and talking about the genre that he absolutely adores and loves. So he wants to keep delivering to the standard that he himself has come to expect, and it ain't easy. I salute him for that.
On the flip side of that, though, I think that once you've got an audience, you actually do raise your game, because you have to start believing that, well, I obviously can do this because people want to read more of my books. And what then happens is you do up your game. So you do get this kind of power up. And it is a very important form of accountability. We talked last week on the podcast about the importance of accountability. I mean, accountability for a successful author comes from continually trying to deliver the very best book they can write for their existing audience and all the new people that will then discover them. So again, accountability exists when you've had success. It often doesn't exist pre-releasing your first book or the first book that you have that's successful. And so I think it's a great problem to have. I think most people would like to have like 1 million readers out there who are like kind of saying, come on, Steve, let's deliver the goods again. I think the biggest challenge for most authors, and we see this in the music industry all the time, is like, do you stick to what worked? Do you stick to what you know, or do you go out on a limb and try something completely different? And that's one of the biggest challenges, because I think if an author's is very successful and they've written 20 of the similar kind of books, they might think, well, I actually want a bit of a change now. But that's a whole conversation for really another podcast, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk. I can relate to this a bit because I've got my second book in a series coming out soon, and I've written the first draft of the third one. Yeah. So there is that little thing at the back of your brain thinking there is expectation. People are going to expect certain things. And that's why hearing from readers has been really useful, because they've told me the stuff they enjoyed. And that doesn't mean I have to do more of the same, but it gives me an idea of what works and what I can lean into. But I also want to surprise and bring new stuff to the table as well, and raise the bar a little bit. And that's what Steve has been doing time and time again with his books. And with each one of them, the expectation goes up, but he keeps delivering.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely brilliant. I find it fascinating as well that again we find another lawyer who's become an amazing best-selling crime writer. And it does link to this idea of, we say it a lot and we'll say it again, write what you know. And I think a lot of times people want to escape reality. So they go and write something which is, fantasy or something which is maybe completely outside of a world that they know, because they like to live in that place, which is awesome. And that requires incredible imagination. But often the best stories are right on the fingertips of things that we've experienced, or variations of things that we've personally experienced, because that's where the writing from the heart, like the authenticity, comes from, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think Steve spoke about this when we first spoke to him in episode 125, the link in the show notes, is that he stands up for people who don't necessarily have a voice, who need representation, who need someone to stand up for them. And, that's a great hook for anyone reading a book. We want to stick up for the little guy, the person who needs, that helping hand. And you again, you see this with Steve on his social media. He's always championing a new author, new voices and what have you. So, it's that, again, write what you know doesn't mean, I have to be a lawyer to write a legal thriller.
Of course.
But I think if you can say, I'm someone who understands that there are people who don't feel they have recourse to the law, so maybe I'm going to create a story where they can find that, where they can find their voice, where they can find a champion. I think that's where Steve's coming from. I think even if he wasn't a lawyer, he'd be writing these books, if you know what I mean, because it's in him.
It's in him. Yeah. Well, it's also write what you know. It's not just about your profession or what you've experienced in life. It can be actually the emotional response to something that you've experienced, and having truly felt something means you can really get into the mind of the character, or you can transfer what you experienced into that character, which makes it really real. So it can sometimes be even just an event in your life that you experienced something or you felt something in a certain way. That's right what you know as well. So there's so many. So it's just about having that focus on thinking about, as you write, like, what should I be pulling into the story here that I've experienced? I don't have to reveal my own experience through that, but at the same time, I really do think that is such a massive key to what connects readers to authors. It's that authenticity of the things that are written from the heart, from a reality. So, but on that note, I mean, Steve also said that it's very rare that he can kind of, if ever, write the book completely. And he always kind of said he spins his wheels. That first part of his novel, the first 20K, he said, he gets anxious about it, has to go back and rewrite the first 10,000 words. I've not heard, did we have other authors talk about that before? I don't seem to recall people like stopping and kind of almost rewriting or doing a second draft of the intro of the book, or Act 1, as Steve calls it, partway through the book.
I'm trying to recall after 330 episodes.
I don't remember. I know that people get stuck. Now, here's the thing. People get stuck at that 20,000. We've heard that. And then it's about how do you keep going? And it's almost like the way Steve deals with it is he goes back. Instead of trying to get past the 20,000, he goes back and he says, right, I'm going to tidy this all up so I can get a bit of more. It's like the ultimate running jump that Michael Connelly told us about, right? The idea of rewind a bit and write. Well, he goes right back to the beginning and kind of like edits from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's that thing of discovering what the story is actually about. And I think once you have that, and once you have your ending and have an idea about your protagonist and where they're going, then you've got a much greater handle on the story. So maybe that's what about. I mean, this is the thing. There's no one way of doing this.
There isn't, right?
There's no single one way of doing this.
More proof.
Everyone has the right. Whatever works for you, folks.
But at the same time, I think rewriting those 20,000 words, those are the most important 20,000 words, because you could have the best 20,000 words at the end of the book, but if the first 20,000 don't get people to the end of the book, then those are kind of lost words. So I guess in some ways having those 20,000 words up front written, I mean, obviously we know that they should all be as good as they can, but particularly first line, first page, first chapter, first act.
Reel them in.
Right? Yeah. Absolutely. Brilliant stuff. So to all those novelists out there that think it gets easier as you start writing, so it's a slightly depressing thought, but actually it's it's not that it gets maybe harder, but the difference between that is it just maybe doesn't get as easy as people think it gets. I think that's the most important thing to remember.
No, but what you have, having been through it a few times, you start telling yourself, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
This is problem solving. This is all this is. I've done this before. I mean, there are occasions, and I saw an author on Twitter just this week who said, and they'd had a terrible year, terrible lockdown, tragedy in the family kind of thing. And they delivered a book and they kind of knew in their hearts it wasn't up to the usual standards. And so they've put the book to one side, and their agent and publisher has been, okay, look, we understand you've had a terrible time. Let's put this to one side. You can work on something new. So that does happen. That's when real life comes and, whacks you over the head. But I think if you're in your prime, as Steve is, you can look at these and go, okay, I've been here before. I've overcome these problems before. This is about problem solving. I've now got the experience and the tools to sort of step back and fix this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what Steve is really saying is the writing doesn't get easier. Writing a cracking story doesn't magically get easier. But what does get easier is you get more confidence, you get more self-esteem, you believe in yourself, you've got an audience that you can write to, so you've got accountability. I mean, that is hard, but it's good. It makes it easier to write because you've got people out there waiting for something. And you've started to build that thicker skin of, the critical side, the criticism, the getting the editor's notes back, all those things. You've been through it before. That side of things gets easier because you become more experienced. But the writing itself is always going to be a challenge. And we want that to be a challenge because otherwise, if writing were easy, it'd kind of be boring, wouldn't it? That's how we grow as writers. It always has to be challenging. So brilliant.
Well, then it becomes box ticking exercise.
Well, exactly. And people would then just give up writing because they'd think, I want to do something more interesting. So thank you so much, Steve, for coming on the show and continuing this incredible story. And we look forward as well to seeing what happens next in your incredible journey. And just to finish up, I guess, Mark, we should mention again, if you want to join a 200-word challenge, if you want to start on that journey that Steve started a number of years ago and has now got to overselling 1 million books, maybe your journey will start with the 200wordchallenge.com. So pop along there, sign up if you want to get the daily writing habit. Or maybe your journey will continue and evolve in the Bestseller Academy. Mr. Stay, where can people find out about the Bestseller Experiment on social media?
Come and find us on Facebook. We are Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram is @BestsellerXP, or come to bestsellerexperiment.com. Everything you want is there. You can contact us there, all sorts of fun stuff. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast catcher. Spread the word. Tell your friends. Big thank you as always to our editors, Dave and JD.
Absolutely. Mark, absolutely brilliant episode. Thank you so much for the incredible interview you did with Steve. And all I have to say to finish off is a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Are you ready to transform your writing and your life? Join the 200-word challenge today. In just 5 days, learn to develop a lifelong writing habit with over 2 hours of free expert coaching and the encouragement of a vibrant community. This program has already changed the lives of thousands of writers like you. No matter how busy you are, this challenge will show you that with just 200 words a day, you can significantly boost your creativity, productivity, mental health, and confidence, propelling you towards the end. For the first time, receive comprehensive coaching and step-by-step guidance, all for free. Transform your writing habit and start your journey to become the writer you've always aspired to be. What are you waiting for? Sign up for free now at 200wordchallenge.com and make writing a part of your daily life for life.
To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.